My name is Michelle Trivedi, and I'm a former health services administrator, did managed care contracting and for large medical group practices, and did benefit design for a nonprofit HMO back in the day. And that background came in really handy when my daughter was diagnosed with autism in 2000. And I found out that her health insurance not only would not cover her autism, but they actually might kick her off our health insurance plan solely because she had autism. And so I joined a group of parents that were already in progress trying to get the nation's very first health insurance reform law passed that requires health insurers to cover autism. So Indiana, here in the state of Indiana, we passed the first autism mandate with no age caps, no dollar limits, no treatment limitations. And we're celebrating now close to 21 years of having that in place, but it was hard fought, and it still continues to be a hard fight to make sure that it is implemented correctly and that insurers do follow not only that mandate law, but also mental health parity law. So being an educated consumer and being an educated provider are exceptionally important to making sure that you're able to assert your rights and to get the health care not only that you need, but that you are paying for, whether it's through your premiums or through taxes or what have you. So knowing your rights and knowing what kind of plan you have are very essential to making those things happen for you. So we'll just dive right in here. As I was saying, making your insurance work for you is the key to that is knowing what type of plan you have, what laws apply to it, and what your rights are under that plan. And it does differ based on what type of plan you have. I get a lot of phone calls. A person will say, I have Anthem. What's going to be covered for autism? Well, Anthem has hundreds of plans. And so what really matters is what type of plan you have with Aetna or Anthem or Blue Cross Blue Shield or CareSource or whatever carrier might be the administrator or the seller of that plan. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back before talking about mental health parity, just to give you the tools for you to be able to figure out what type of plan you have so you can make that plan work for you. So in general, insurance kind of falls into two big buckets with the employer-based plans. So if you get your insurance through an employer, the plans generally fall into two big buckets. The ERISA, or the self-insured, which is federally regulated. That's regulated by federal law, by the US Department of Labor. The employer is essentially the insurance company in a sense. And I'm really simplifying this. Obviously, this law is very complex, but what you need to know is that the employer is ultimately responsible for what is covered, what isn't covered, and the financials of that, paying those claims. They take the financial risk for their employees' health and their employees' health care. And so in that sense, the employer is the ultimate decision maker about what gets covered and what doesn't get covered. And importantly, they have what's called a fiduciary role in that regard. And basically what that means is, as a fiduciary, you have to act in the best interests of the beneficiaries. So a self-insured plan needs to act in the best interest of the covered employees and their dependents. And that will become an important point a little bit later. So the insurance carrier, the Anthem, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, in this instance, is a third-party administrator. And so they are administering the claims, they're doing the paperwork processes, they may be contracted to also do the medical necessity reviews. But at the end of the day, the employer kind of holds the power there in terms of the decision-making, what's going to be covered, what's not going to be covered. The other general type of employer-based plan is the fully funded or the fully insured plan. Those plans are generally state regulated. Certain federal laws do apply, but the state law becomes much more important. And state mandates, for example, have to be followed. Whereas in an ERISA plan or in a self-insured plan, state mandates don't necessarily have to be followed. So you kind of have to know which one you're in, so you know which laws apply and if any state mandates apply. And then this also helps you figure out if federal mental health parity law applies. With a fully insured plan or a fully funded plan, the insurance carrier decides, is the decision maker as to what's going to be covered, what's not going to be covered, what the policies are, and what the processes are. And the state Department of Insurance, or whatever it might be called in your state, sometimes it's called different things, but the state entity that regulates insurance products in your state would be the regulator that would be in charge of enforcing any laws or rules that this type of plan needs to follow. So if you have an employer plan, it's really important to know upfront and to find out from HR or from your plan if it's ERISA and self-insured, or if it's fully funded and fully insured, because then that tells you which laws apply and also which regulator is obligated to help you if you have a problem with your insurance plan. Okay, there's in terms of employer-based plans, there are some other types of plans, and this is kind of where you're going to need some extra help if you have one of these types of plans, because different rules apply. Union trusts, church-based cooperatives to provide healthcare, they may not be technically an insurance plan. And so some of these laws may not apply. So you have to make sure that you know what type of plan you have and what the rules of the road are, so to speak. And so these plans will have to have in their documents and in their policies what type of plan they are, what rules and regulations apply, how you appeal, those kinds of things. But just so that you know, for purposes of today, these types of plans, small government entity plans, can file for exemption from federal mental health parity law, and some other regulations from the Affordable Care Act may not apply to them as well. So if you have a plan like this, you'll need to do a little bit extra legwork to figure out what your rights are and where you can go for help. Federal employee health plans as well. They're, of course, regulated by the federal government, but they may have different rules than, for example, an employer-based plan that is a non-government employer-based plan that is regulated by federal law. So, you know, again, you'll have to talk with your folks with human resources and get the documentation to let you know what your rights are and what the process is. And just a quick comment on short-term plans. After the Affordable Care Act was passed, short-term plans went away for a while, and then under the Trump administration, they were brought back as a health insurance option. But you have to be very careful with these types of plans because they have a lot of limitations and generally are not quality coverage for anyone with any type of chronic condition or any type of condition that's going to need ongoing treatment. And also what is covered can be very, very minimal, even if you have an accident or an injury. So be very, very careful and read the very fine print in any of those types of plans, because we get calls, people very surprised at what they don't cover. Then in terms of non-employer-based insurance, you have your publicly funded. A lot of people with autism may be on their parents' employer-based plan and Medicaid, and then also children's CHIP for children. And so these are both federally regulated and are administered by the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. and also your state-based social services administration or your state-based family services administration. So that would be the entities that would be administering that plan. And Medicaid is a federal government and state government cooperation, basically, that both governments, federal and state, fund the Medicaid health plan in each of the states, and they vary greatly from state to state. So it's pretty difficult to give a lot of blanket information about Medicaid because they can vary so differently from state to state. So you'll definitely want to engage with local advocacy groups to get the most up-to-date information on what Medicaid covers in your area, and also how they work with Medicaid home and community-based waivers as well. Okay, then lastly, the other type of insurance that a lot of folks with autism tend to use, at least in our state, Indiana, is the Affordable Care Act marketplace plans. And the reason why a lot of folks in our state especially use this plan is because in our state, it's required to follow our autism mandate. Not every state has an Affordable Care Act marketplace essential health benefits benchmark plan that requires coverage for autism. So you will definitely want to check in your state with your state Department of Insurance about what the Affordable Care Act marketplace plans in your state have to cover in terms of autism treatment, because it does vary. It depends on when your mandate was passed, how your mandate got passed. And so there are states where it is required to be covered, but then there are states where it is not required to be covered. If you are in a state where the Affordable Care Act marketplace is required to cover autism, we see a lot of families use that. If their employer-based plan doesn't cover autism or doesn't have to cover autism because it doesn't have to follow federal mental health parity. We also see a lot of families use it, quite frankly, because they don't know how to fight their employer-based plan to get autism coverage, or don't have the wherewithal or the financial means to take on that kind of fight and to go through that process, or to hire a lawyer or that kind of thing. So some families use this as an option to be able to get coverage for their loved one without having to go through the hoops of appeals or go through the hoops of taking any kind of legal action. So this may be an option in your state as well. Then just a note on coordinating employer plans with Medicaid, because this can be important, especially if you do have the protections of federal mental health parity. Medicaid is the payer of last resort. So the employer insurance always gets billed first, and the employer authorizations need to be exhausted first. And then Medicaid pays co-pays, deductibles, co-insurance for any of the Medicaid authorized services that are covered for that employer plan. And so that will be that kind of coordination of benefits. One thing that caregivers need to be aware of is if you do have a loved one on Medicaid because of a disability, there's no balance billing for if the provider is a Medicaid provider and is under contract with your state Medicaid. They should not be billing a Medicaid recipient a balance bill unless there's a signed agreement for every date of service. And this agreement has to be signed before services are rendered. So they can't render services for several months and then come back and say, oh, well, now you owe us for all these co-pays and deductibles and whatnot. But do keep in mind, network is very important. Network is, if you have managed Medicaid in your state, and even if you don't have managed Medicaid in your state, if you still have fee-for-service Medicaid in your state, the provider does need to be a Medicaid provider, and they do need to be in network with your type of Medicaid, especially if you have managed Medicaid in your state. They don't necessarily have to pay for out-of-network services. So you'll want to make sure that when you are choosing providers, that you're choosing providers that are in your network, and you want to make sure to verify with them that they are in your network, so that you don't get surprised with any financial obligations that you weren't aware of. So make sure that you're communicating with your providers and their insurance folks to make sure that you have that all squared away before services are rendered. And then just a note about Affordable Care Act marketplace plans and Medicaid. In states where child-only plans are available, a child can have both an ACA marketplace plan and waiver compatible Medicaid. So if a child has a disability and is on Medicaid because of having a disability, not because of income, they can have both types of policies, but they cannot have subsidies. So you have to make sure that you don't get them on a subsidized plan, or else that will have tax implications and could get very complicated. And families may do this for a variety of reasons, especially in situations where it may be difficult to access autism treatment otherwise via an employer plan, or if they are self-employed and the family is on the Affordable Care Act anyway, the family can get subsidies, but the child who is also on Medicaid cannot get subsidies. So you'll want to work with a navigator, an ACA marketplace plan navigator in your state, to make sure that that is all coordinated, so you don't get any kind of surprises with tax implications later on. And then one important note about the Affordable Care Act that's really important for our community, for the autism community, is that the Affordable Care Act, in addition to putting into insurance law the essential health benefits and abolishing lifetime limits to care, things that are very popular among the American people, children on insurance to age 26, a really important protection that it added that benefits not only our community, but the population as a whole, especially in the time of a pandemic, is that the Affordable Care Act expanded federal mental health parity protections to nearly all health plans. There are still exceptions, but it added that mental health parity protection to, for example, the individual market, to small group health plans, for example. And so it really made mental health coverage much more accessible for all, not just the folks who are on marketplace plans specifically. It really made mental health insurance coverage much more accessible for our entire population, and especially for people with autism. So the Affordable Care Act is a really important law for our community, and one that we need to be aware of protecting, because if the Affordable Care Act were to ever be repealed or struck down by the courts, it would affect that access to mental health parity. And so far, the court-based issues with the Affordable Care Act have kept these things in place thus far, and it's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, and thus far has kept all of this in place. So I hope that we're in a stable time now where we can count on the mental health parity protections that are afforded to many more plans through the Affordable Care Act, but that's definitely something to be aware of. So federal mental health parity law. Basically, this is the, it was passed in 2008. So it's not a new law. It's been on the books for quite some time, but as with a lot of things that affect our community, getting this implemented and getting it enforced has been a struggle, and is where we usually run into roadblocks. And what federal mental health parity law basically says is that if a health plan offers mental health and substance use disorder benefits, then those benefits can be no less favorable than the benefits that are given to substantially all medical and surgical benefits. So the law doesn't require that a health plan offers mental health benefits. So that's another thing to look at with your health plan. You know, first of all, is it fully insured? Is it self-insured? Is it Affordable Care Act? The second thing to look at is, does it offer mental health benefits? If it does, then you're going to be looking at issues potentially of parity as long as mental health parity, federal mental health parity law applies. And also, many states have their own mental health parity laws, which adds a little bit of complexity, of course, to the whole situation. Your state mental health parity laws do coordinate with the federal mental health parity law. Some states' laws have specific mental health conditions that are carved out of their mental health parity law at the state level. And that may affect whether or not federal mental health parity applies to your plan as well. So it's important to communicate with your local advocacy organizations and also to utilize some of the resources that I have at the end of the presentation and your state-based insurance regulator to get the most up-to-date and correct information about if your state has a mental health parity law that carves out autism or carves out any other condition that you may need coverage for, so that you can make the best decision about what type of plan is going to be best for your loved one and for your family. And then these two terms here, the QTLs and QTLs. We love acronyms in healthcare. We love acronyms in the legal world and in government. These are basically the types of treatment limitations that this law looks to address. The quantitative treatment limitations, numbers, kind of like what it says. They look at, do they offer only 10 visits for mental health conditions for a certain treatment, but they offer 50 visits for the physical condition? Do they have a dollar cap on how much mental health treatment you can get per year, but they don't have any dollar cap on how much physical health treatment you can get per year? So looking at the dollars, looking at the visit limits, looking at the numbers associated with the treatment. The non-quantitative treatment limitations are things that are a little bit harder to pull out. Things like networks. Are the networks accessible? Are the networks specific enough? Do they have enough specialists? Do they say they have a full network of ABA providers, but there are no ABA providers in your network that treat teenagers or that treat adults? So those types of limitations are a little bit harder to look at in terms of parity, because they may not be on the surface as easily countable as some of those other limits, like visit limits or dollar caps or age caps or things like that fall under quantitative treatment limits. A big category in non-quantitative treatment limitations is medical necessity review. And that's where a lot of issues come into play with mental health parity, with autism treatment, is the medical review and what rules and what reasoning and what evidence and what documentation is the plan using to determine whether or not services are medically necessary. And so a lot of issues with mental health parity come down to the medical necessity review. And is that just really a smokescreen for an age cap? Or is that just really a smokescreen for putting hourly limits on treatment hours per week or something like that? So that's where a lot of the work that advocates do is around those types of limitations. Because they're just a little bit tougher nut to crack, so to speak. A really important recent class action lawsuit that came up and was ruled in favor of the patients is the WIT versus United Behavioral Health. And it's important because it applied to these self-funded plans, these ERISA plans, which is the majority of plans in the country. And even small employers can be self-insured and under ERISA. It's not just your big employers like P&G and Microsoft, and it can be small employers as well. But this lawsuit was looking at their mental health treatment in general, not just autism treatment, but their mental health and substance use disorder treatment. And it looks specifically at their medical necessity review criteria, the rules and the checklist that they were using to make medical necessity decisions about whether or not someone would get the level of treatment that was prescribed for them covered. And what it found was it really hinged on the fiduciary responsibility of the ERISA plan to act in the best interests of its beneficiaries. And it said that it violated the terms of its own plan because it denied claims based on what the court considered to be substandard clinical guidelines. Basically, that their plan was not looking at what clinicians and what practicing clinicians say and have a consensus about, agree about what is the standard of care. And you'll hear that term a lot in medicine and a lot in insurance as well, is what is the standard of care treatment for this particular condition. This case hinged on that the United Behavioral Health was not using medical necessity review criteria that met that standard of care, that minimum standard of care that clinicians, practicing clinicians agreed on. And so that was very important. And that in doing that, they violated their own plan's language and violated their own fiduciary responsibility to their beneficiaries. So from that ruling came some wonderful language about what medical necessity criteria ought to have in it for mental health conditions. And autism, because it is in the what's called the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Conditions, because autism is in the DSM, it's considered a mental health condition for the purposes of insurance and for the purposes of federal mental health parity law. It is also, interestingly, in the Indiana mandate language, it's considered a medical condition without labeling it as either physical or mental health. And so it was considered to be under physical health as well. A neurobiological disorder. And so it's really, for the purposes of Indiana law, considered to be both. So that is one thing that you want to check within your own state laws as well. And again, as I said, there are some states that do carve out autism from their mental health state law. And so then you have to figure out if federal mental health parity will apply because of that carve out. But in general, because autism is in that DSM, the DSM is kind of the cornerstone of federal mental health parity law, and the conditions that are in that manual are considered to be covered under federal mental health parity law. The state law throws a little bit of a wrench into that. And so that's the joy of how our government works, is that state and federal is always in balance. So you'll definitely want to educate yourself about what the issue, about how that works in your state. So this WIT case, and looking at the federal mental health parity law, brought some really great language in the ruling about what good quality medical necessity review criteria, rules, and reasoning should look like. And this is some of the language that is from that ruling, and talking about what is important for medical reviewers to consider when looking at what is the minimal standard of care and what should be covered. And there's model legislation that has grown out of this court case. And I believe it's already been passed in at least one state. And so advocates across the country are very interested in this because not only is it very beneficial for the autism community, but it's very beneficial for anyone who wants to access health insurance to treat a condition where the insurer is not using medical necessity criteria that matches the standard of care for treatment for that particular condition. So even physical conditions as well, if this language were to be adopted, could really help to change the landscape for patients in terms of their health insurance and in terms of getting coverage for what is truly the standard of care treatment for their condition based on what clinicians agree upon versus what an insurance company has decided they want to pay for. So a very important case that we're all keeping an eye on. I put this in here just as a note for folks. We get a lot of calls about, especially because of families wanting to be able to access ABA coverage for their adult children with autism and being able to keep their child on their employer-based plan in order to do that, especially if your state has an age cap on Medicaid coverage for ABA, and if it's limited to under age 20 or 21. So it is possible in most plans and in most states to keep an adult child with a disability on your employer-based plan. And this would be especially attractive if your plan does fall under federal mental health parity law, because then age caps on ABA, age caps on other autism treatments would be problematic. So you'll want to get the information from your plan and from human resources about how to do that. And how to keep your adult child on your plan as long as they're your dependent. And I have a 23-year-old with autism. And so we made sure to do this, even though she hasn't hit that magical 26 age yet. We made sure to file all of this paperwork for her when she turned 18 with our plan, just to make sure that that coverage would be available to her because of having no age caps on treatment for autism in our mandate law and in the plan that she's currently in. So definitely look into that in your state as well. And your state's Department of Insurance should have information for consumers on if this is a state law in your state that employers offer this. And then also your human resources department should also have information. And here's some of the language to look for in terms of requesting that information. Different plans call it different things, but it's typically dependent with a disability or a disabled adult child or disabled dependent. Then just wanted to give you a few links to some resources on mental health parity, and these slides will be available and for you to refer to. Just some information on federal mental health parity law, on options for adult children with developmental disabilities for insurance coverage. And then these are some of my favorite, oops, sorry. Let's go back to that. These are some of my favorite links on mental health parity in particular, and they have some fact sheets and information. Paritytrack.org has state-by-state information on mental health parity, not only the federal law and how it applies in your state, but also if you have a state law, what it entails and what it covers, if it has a carve out for autism. So paritytrack.org is a good website to look at. And then the Department of Labor has a nice fact sheet on mental health parity. And that would be also a good resource if you have one of those self-insured plans as well, because the Department of Labor would be your regulator if you have a self-insured plan. And then the last one down here, the NAIC, that's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So every state Department of Insurance, whatever your state happens to call that, has a commissioner. That person and that person's staff would be part of this organization. And so the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, has a nice consumer page on their website with information on how to file complaints, how to find your regulator in your state, and other consumer information about insurance laws and regulations in your particular state. And then, of course, Autism Speaks and the Autism Legal Resource Center are also wonderful sources of information for state-based differences as well. And I know that the Autism Legal Resource Center is working on a new website, so please keep checking back on that. They're going to be adding a whole lot of new and updated information, and it is currently under construction. So I'm personally excited to see how it turns out. So definitely make sure that you check back for that. With that, I'm going to put up my contact information, and that's kind of the end of my slides and spiel. At this point, I would love to open things up for questions. And I'm going to also check the chat here and see. Yes, thanks, Shannon. California did pass that model legislation, and CASP, the Council of Autism Services Providers, which is a wonderful organization, is really involved in trying to get that model legislation passed in several states and hopefully nationwide. And I know that our advocates here in Indiana have committed to helping to get that passed here, and hopefully we will. But yes, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions, and don't be shy. I know it's a lot of information.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Lindsay Kimball. I'm a mom of a 2-year-old with autism, among other diagnoses, and I hope you can hear me. I'm actually at therapy with my son right now, and I kind of ran into their kitchen break room to ask a couple questions.
That's what we do. That's what we autism parents do. No worries.
My first question is just to clarify. So if we have a self-insured plan, it sounds like if there are state law carve-outs that those trump of the mental health parity law. Is that correct?
It may. Yes, it may, because in the enforcement of mental health parity, a court's going to look at both, and so it gets complicated. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm speaking from what I've learned from the Autism Law Summit and from working with Dan Unum. But it's my understanding that a court's going to look at both, and depending on how it's worded at the state level, it may affect whether or not there is coverage through the federal mental health parity law.
Okay.
And that would unfortunately be a situation where you would definitely need to have legal counsel take a look at your plan and your state law to give you the best advice as to what applies.
Okay, great. And then in terms of the test under the Mental Health Parity Act, when you're looking at what is, I guess, comparing the no less favorable to substantially all. So if you're looking at something that, like, for the physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy has a set number of visit limits, but those visit limits apply regardless of diagnoses, then would that be considered parity, or is it more broadly looking at all medical benefits as opposed to just those, that highly comparable, like, it's 30 visits for PT no matter the diagnosis, or is it looking at like all types of medical benefits?
Right. It looks at it more broadly because it looks at categories of treatment. And so the category that ABA and that physical therapy and that speech therapy falls into is outpatient treatment. So it's a common misconception that if, you know, a stroke victim gets 30 visits of PT, then it's okay to limit autism to only 30 visits of PT. It's not that direct comparison PT to PT. It looks at what is available to medical surgical conditions in the outpatient services category more broadly. So they'll look at that, and they'll also look at, you know, if you have a physical condition, even though you have a limitation of 30 physical therapy visits, the way that some plans are written, that might be per diagnosis. That also might be something that you can get an extension of benefits on if you still meet medical necessity. So there are a lot of kind of complicating factors to making that comparison. But it is, you're right, it is a more general comparison of what's available. It's not that direct, you know, looking only at what speech therapy or what physical therapy is available for a particular physical condition, and then comparing that to what speech therapy and physical therapy is available to autism.
So I guess then it does. Could you give me examples? So like besides like the, you know, the traditional therapy treatments that I just mentioned and chiropractic care, like what other medical outpatient coverage would you be looking at in a plan? I guess I just don't even know what that would be.
Well, for example, with ABA therapy, one of the things that they looked at in looking at the comparisons here in our state, our Department of Insurance looked at it and said, well, if you have a physical or surgical condition, you don't have a limitation on how many times you can go see the doctor in an outpatient setting. Or
so just like a regular doctor's visit.
Yeah, that's what our Department of Insurance looked at. And then we had different commissioners that said, you know, no, if you get 30 visits of speech therapy, you get 30 visits of speech therapy. So there's going to definitely be differences in how the insurance commissioners interpret the law and how much they're willing to delve into the interpretation of the law. But my understanding is that that direct comparison is not what's intended. And so it's also, you know, different commissioners and different commissioner staff are going to have different levels of education about how to apply federal mental health parity law. They do have guidance from the Department of Labor on how to do that, some very detailed, very lengthy guidance on how to do that. But it's a much deeper dive than just looking at visit limits or just looking at just the discrete, you know, speech therapy compared to speech therapy.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was helpful.
Sure.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. I chatted it also. Here's a situation regarding Blue Cross Blue Shield age limitation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best way to proceed when you have like employer-based health insurance out of state, which will not cover above the certain age, but in our state it does cover? It definitely a violation of Parity Act because it's age restriction based only on autism and not other mental health services.
Yeah, couple different ways to approach it, and a couple of different ways that I've approached it in the past in helping families. If the employer is supportive of their employees and generally has a culture of being supportive of their employees, a lot of times we can go with an advocate to the employer and to the decision makers at the employer. So it may be a benefits committee, it may be the human resources director. You know, it's kind of, you know your employer and kind of the culture there and what would be the best approach, and educate them about why, especially an age limit, is so problematic, because usually once the employer is educated about that, and since they are the decision maker in a self-insured plan, then they can work with the carrier who's administering that plan to modify, to change the policy and to change the plan to take out those limitations. A lot of employers depend on their administrator for the most up-to-date and accurate information about what their obligations are. And sometimes the carriers are not maybe as well educated about mental health parity as they should be or could be. And things do get through their compliance departments that are not in keeping with federal mental health parity law when it applies. And so a lot of times educating the employer can be really helpful if they're open to that.
It's just like you probably agree it's going to take ages to educate them and so forth. Just like some ridiculous things, like, for example, they would not cover hearing aids, but they will cover cochlear implant, which are technically the same thing. So my main question is it worth, which is faster? Because we can't wait forever.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And which is faster, to sue them and proceed with the lawyer? Because I feel like since it's a huge company, it's going to take ages just because of bureaucracy and until you reach the right person.
Sure.
And financially, it's going to make more sense to speed it up.
Yeah. As a parent, what I usually recommend to families is look to see is, as a parent, I'm a fighter, and not every family has the same tolerance for fighting and for going through the emotional and the mental stress of engaging in those fights. So the first thing your family has to do is kind of decide what's your tolerance for the fight. And then also, what are your financial resources for the fight as well? Because lawyers are expensive. That is what it is. And lawsuits take time, and lawsuits also can ratchet up the emotions around everything and get people to dig their heels in. So when I'm working with families, what I try to do is see if we can do a 2 or 3 pronged approach. First thing is find out if there's a quicker way to get your child covered in the meantime. So for example, I worked with a pilot who had a union plan, and we got his child on the Affordable Care Act marketplace plan so he could get coverage right away while we were fighting with his union and with his employer to change their policy. And it took about a year, and they did change the policy, but at the same time, his child did not go without coverage because they accessed the Affordable Care Act marketplace plan and paid out of pocket for that. And I believe he was reimbursed for that after the fact, after everything got changed. So if there's a way to get your child into treatment via another funding source quickly, while at the same time you are kind of fighting the good fight, so to speak, I usually recommend that, because you don't have forever to wait. You don't want your child to wait for treatment. So definitely know your options for coverage in your state, and if there's one that you can access now while you're working through the bureaucracy of your employer, because then you can always ask to be reimbursed for that. And if it does come down to a lawsuit, that would definitely be something to talk to the attorney about. Including in that is getting reimbursed for any out-of-pocket costs that you had to take on because they were not following mental health parity if they were supposed to, if they were required to.
All right, cool, thank you.
Sure, yeah, and another thing to keep in mind that also kind of intersects with federal mental health parity is also the Americans with Disabilities Act. If your health plan has specific policies geared only to autism, that
Yes.
that have limitations that aren't applied to other mental health conditions or aren't applied to physical conditions. That could also be an Americans with Disabilities Act issue as well. So for example, I was working with a family and their policy said, we cover autism, but we won't cover, these specific services for autism. And so that became an American with Disabilities Act issue because they were singling out autism as a particular disability to have limitations placed on its treatment that weren't generally applied to other conditions. Other conditions were able to access the generally recommended treatments for their condition, whereas autism only was restricted to just this short list of what the plan was willing to.
Yes. So that's the main issue, because it will cover, but under certain age, other
Right.
mental health disabilities would not have any age or amount of hours covered limitation. That's
Right.
the
Yeah.
biggest issue.
Yeah. So that's both a mental health parity law issue and an ADA, an Americans with Disabilities Act issue as well, because they're targeting a specific disability for limitations that aren't applied to other conditions generally. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That gives some tools. Thank you.
Sure. I wish I could say that was not common, but it is unfortunately very common in a lot of plans to have those types.
Yeah, the problem is since babies just started to be covered and our kids aging out, that's going to be like a big, I expect going to be a big snowball. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we're at the beginning of that snowball, so we're a little bit of a disadvantage. We'll see.
Yes, we have to be, a lot of times we autism parents have to be trailblazers for sure. Yeah.
And we have kind of same age kids, looks like. Mine is 20.
Okay, yeah, mine is 23. And yeah, I'm happy to report we just had a successful lawsuit here in Indiana to take the age cap off of our Medicaid ABA benefit. And so we're hoping that will help to get other states to do the same thing, as long as the state doesn't appeal it. So we'll see.
Well, they will appeal. Absolutely.
Probably, but we'll keep going then. So yeah, that's what we do.
How is the life after school?
Different.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yes, life after school is different. But we're very blessed to have no age caps on our ABA under our state law. And so my daughter's still in ABA therapy 30 hours a week, which has been really tremendous for her. So I think
that's a terrific. We should move to Indiana then.
Without that would have been a very, very difficult transition for sure. Yeah,
right.
We're very blessed.
Are you aware of what other states have more like welcoming ABA services for adults outside Indiana?
I believe that Massachusetts also does not have an age cap. And I'm trying to think, I know that a lot of other states that did have age caps are starting to challenge them based on either mental health parity or on Americans with Disabilities Act. And then there's also a non-discrimination clause in the Affordable Care Act that applies to a lot of plans. So there's kind of 3 different ways to challenge an age cap, depending on which laws apply to your plan. It could be an ADA issue, it can be a mental health parity issue, and then it can also be an Affordable Care Act discrimination issue. If the benefit design is such that it discriminates against a particular disability, it can be called into question. And so if an age cap is only being applied to autism, for example, not only would that be, it could be an ADA issue, it can also be an Affordable Care Act issue for that, with that non-discrimination clause if it applies. So I'm hopeful that a lot of those will start to be eliminated, because there are 3 different ways to get at it in terms of showing that it's discriminatory and that it's not proper.
Is there another option? Just move states. That's it.
That's it. If you can do it, that is also an option too.
Well, we moved countries for our child, so moving states, it's
Yes.
a piece of cake.
We do. We have a lot of families in Indiana that have moved from other states and other countries to access services. It's unfortunate that that's what we autism parents have to do, but a lot of people do that. Yeah.
And it's good learning process.
Yes.
That was extremely helpful. Thank you
Good.
very much.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much. Any other questions? We still have, I think, 4 minutes.
No one tries to monopolize our attention.
No worries. Well, I hope that this was helpful, and please do check back to the website. I know that this has been recorded and will be posted, and the slides will be available. And do check out these mental health parity links for more detailed information about your state and how mental health parity works in your state with your state law. And thank you so much for sharing an hour with me to talk about insurance. It's not always the most exciting topic, but so important for our families. And if you have individual questions that you want to email me, please do. Here's my email there. And keep checking back with the Autism Legal Resource Center as they're constructing their new website for more information. And we'll look forward to hopefully seeing some of you again on a future parent education.
A really quick question, probably for
Yes.
everyone, how we can access the where actually we can access the PowerPoint.
I'm going to let Shannon answer that one, because I don't do the technical stuff.
With your permission, I will post it on the website along with these videos.
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Shannon.
Permission granted. That was easy.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone, again. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you for sharing your stories and your questions too. I appreciate that. It's always intimidating to be in a group like this, so I appreciate your bravery. Thanks so much.